He's a master communicator cinematically.
He's such a meticulous craftsman.
Some directors, you just know, whatever the you want me to do, I'm in.
Each movie takes him somewhere completely different.
This career is almost the revenge of the cinephile.
Like so many films by Todd Haynes, I'm Not There dives into the past to ask questions about the present. Here, Haynes reimagines the iconic moment when Bob Dylan goes electric at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. A rock and roll controversy visualized as an assault on the singer's audience.
There's a sort of interrogation that goes on with me around the whole way that popular film and narrative film, the role that it plays in our world. I find it to be both something I love and hate, you know, but something I find to be a powerful tool.
From micro-budget art films to hyper-stylized star vehicles, director Todd Haynes consistently provokes strong reactions from both critics and audiences. Focused on characters who like to test new identities and social boundaries, Haynes is a master at raising challenging questions.
The theme of identity comes up again and again and again in all of his work. You know, who are we? Who do we belong to? How do we define ourselves?
You know, he doesn't see a lot of hard lines in anything, and it makes for complicated filmmaking, and it's, you know, it's gratifying.
He's like a 10-year-old kid. You know, he's got that vibe. But then when he settles in, he's more like a 35-year-old surgeon. When you can have trust in the surgeon, you can do anything.
He is one of the few American directors who really knows how to make use of every inch of the frame in kind of an extraordinary way.
After a privileged LA childhood and Ivy League education, Todd Haynes joins the gritty underground scene of 1980s New York.
He's in this wonderful downtown world of artists and gay people, and he's there when people are living in apartments that cost so little that you can pay your rent for a few months and go make a film.
It was a time where a lot of filmmakers were starting to make their first movies, like Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee, Julie Dash. There was a kind of cinema being made on filmmakers' own terms in their own voice.
Haynes makes his first statement with Superstar, a short film about the tragic death of 32-year-old pop singer Karen Carpenter.
She was Richard Nixon's favorite singer, her and her brother, the Carpenters. They represented this view of America.
But the pressures of stardom and Karen's chronic problems with self-image result in a severe case of anorexia, which Haynes explores in a unique way.
For me, it was a little experiment. What if we followed a traditional generic form, the star story genre, and told that film with dolls and not people?
The idea of making a movie about Karen Carpenter using Barbie dolls seemed brilliant and hysterically funny. He manipulates the dolls the way a child would, you know, with unseen hands.
Karen, people are talking about you. Your fans are worried. I can hear them gasping when we walk on stage. Now, what the hell are we supposed to do about that?
Richard.
The voices, like the hands, animate the dolls.
I know.
By the end of the movie, you can't believe what a wonderful performance those dolls have given, which gives voice in a very real way to what she must have been going through.
When Karen is hospitalized, Haynes carves layers off the doll to illustrate the ravages of her disease.
What was so touching was the amount of empathy that he had for these people.
Superstar becomes an art house hit, and Richard Carpenter threatens to sue Haynes for copyright infringement.
We got 2 cease and desists. One was from Mattel, manufactured Barbie, and the other was from the Carpenter estate.
To this day, the film is not a film that I can legally show publicly.
But Superstar's underground success proves that there's an appetite for Haynes' subversive style.
It made me think that audiences had the ability to address experimentation. And I thought, that's cool. I like that. I like igniting the thinking and the feeling.
At the height of the AIDS crisis, Haynes' first feature, Poison, is an activist plea disguised as an experimental art film.
It's an homage to 3 different genres, to the horror film, to the prison movie, to TV news. Todd is having fun, sending up all of the genres, and yet making a very serious statement about the United States in 1991 and the AIDS epidemic.
Poison begins with a legend that says the whole world is dying of panicky fright. It was a way of dealing with this feeling of fear and anxiety anybody who was young, urban, and in the arts was feeling.
The horror story was literally about somebody who had experimented with the sexual component, and it's done as a Black comedic reference to low-grade B style horror films.
The scientist drinks the human sex drive serum, which turns him into a plague-carrying predator.
It didn't differ all that much from the dominant way people with AIDS were being depicted by the media at the time. It was hard for panic around HIV to be distinguished from panic around homosexuality in general.
Poison wins the grand jury prize at Sundance, but its success sparks a backlash on the basis of the film's partial government funding.
Reverend Donald Wildman, who was the head of the American Family Association, sent a letter to everybody in Congress. Did you realize that your taxpayers' money has gone to fund this homosexual, filthy, disgusting movie?
But even in Poison's sex scenes, like this encounter between 2 young prisoners, the images are never explicit.
There's no frontal nudity in the film. It was simply the fact of its emotional power as representing sex between men, as representing a gay identity, as representing prison life.
The subject matter is so obscene and so gross and so filthy, I'd rather not talk about it at all.
Have you seen the film?
No.
Our little movie became the center of this giant controversy.
With crazy, like, urban myths about what was in the film, none of which was actually in the film.
The publicists around me were jittering with excitement.
This is a movie that will now make money.
That's
correct?
really not what we're discussing tonight.
But that's going to happen to you.
The discussion I was hoping to have got a little bit, drowned out by the culture wars.
Next, Haynes injects Poison's preoccupation with illness and identity into the seemingly perfect life of a suburban Los Angeles housewife.
Todd really began to carve out this territory of the beautiful woman, the beautiful life that then comes undone.
I received a screenplay out of the blue, and I'd never read anything like it.
Todd Haynes puts a twist on the experience of a rich suburban housewife, played by Julianne Moore, who suddenly starts suffering severe allergic reactions to her surroundings.
In every scene, there's a physical and an emotional reason for her to become ill. Her nose suddenly starts to bleed after a perm.
Looks nice.
A place where she goes to make herself look like everybody else.
Oh my God. Paul, do you have a Kleenex?
Carol White was entirely defined by her environment, and all of a sudden the environment is the thing threatening her sense of self and her sense of safety.
It's about being marked as a pariah within your own circle in this upper echelon world of LA that Todd was actually from. He used a lot of his relatives' houses to shoot that film.
What's going on? I don't know. Carol? Oh my God, Linda, what happened? She can't breathe. Carol.
She has an asthma attack at a baby shower where she's also remarkably estranged from the women around her.
It sort of has this kind of horror story form where the plague is coming and she knows it, and they just see her as being crazy.
Carol White checks herself into an antiseptic retreat.
At the end of the movie, I'm completely emaciated. I have a large sore on my forehead. So at the point that I'm looking in the mirror and saying, I love you, I really love you, it's heartbreaking.
I love you.
She's not connecting. She's sick.
I really love you.
It really is a comment on the evils of letting someone else determine your identity.
Safe is hailed as a masterwork and a sharp metaphor for the AIDS crisis, but Haynes' activist audience is let down.
It upset a lot of people who felt that Todd should have made the film more specifically about AIDS, but that also the film seems to have a kind of ambivalence about, you know, whether or not Carol's disease is her fault.
Through his filmmaking, he can make you ask questions about yourself, and in an uncomfortable, cinematic, enjoyable, dark way.
My films, I think, are like these fever dreams from the past that ask us to look at ourselves and reflect ourselves back.
Haynes returns to the 70s with the glam rock tribute Velvet Goldmine, inspired by his own youthful fascination with David Bowie.
The over-the-top shine and sheen and really undefinable sexuality was a big influence on the young Todd.
In this concert scene, the director creates a dazzling spectacle to introduce the bisexual rock star Brian Slade and the liberating effect he has on his fans.
I love his entrance into that beautiful, exotic, fully expressed and yet disguised world, you know, where people play these kind of crazy, big, enormous characters.
Haynes recreates the confusion and artifice of the era when the fan, played by Christian Bale, sees his rock idol stage the ultimate act of performance art, faking his own death.
I remember seeing Christian Bale's face and how emotional he was.
But Haynes' most ambitious production to date hits a roadblock.
Todd had the intention of using David Bowie's music. Well, Bowie said no. There was a moment of like, oh shit, like, how are we gonna pull this off?
Well, you're the grand one, have you noticed?
Haynes hires several well-known artists to write songs inspired by Bowie. Hot One riffs on the singer's cabaret tribute, Time. But the music is the only element that's well-received, and Haynes suffers the first failure of his career.
I'm glad I caught you on my...
It was a film that was very misunderstood. I think people went to it expecting some kind of rock biopic, and that's not what it was.
His follow-up is also the story of shifting identities and sexual boundaries, set even deeper in the past.
If you're not teared up by the end of Far From Heaven, I think there's something wrong with you.
The phone rang in my apartment and I picked it up and he's like, hey. I was like, hey. And he just kind of very casually said, you know, I wrote a part for you. You know, I'm like, what? And he goes, do you want to read it? And I was like, uh-huh.
Todd Haynes' Far From Heaven stars Julianne Moore as housewife Kathy Whitaker and Dennis Quaid as her husband, Frank.
She's the American dream. She has a beautiful home and a wonderful marriage and 2 perfect children and everything she could ever want. And of course, what she ends up finding is that it's hollow.
When Kathy's gardener Raymond, played by Dennis Haysbert, finds her scarf,
Could this possibly... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you found it.
Yeah.
Haynes makes its lavender shade pop vividly in the frame, exposing the story's subtext about color and racial barriers.
I had a feeling it might be yours.
The film is a tribute to Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows, which also explores the relationship between a woman and her gardener.
Douglas Sirk made gorgeous color films, but underneath that sheen, there was always a sort of hidden critique that maybe the American dream wasn't all that. In a way, he used beauty as a weapon. And I would argue that that's what Todd Haynes does in his films, too.
I remember the beautiful tracking shot that kind of follows me around a corner, and I see the light underneath the door and say, you know, very sympathetically, oh, Frank. Oh, Frank. And then she opens the door. Frank? It's not anything within the realm of her expectation. She just doesn't know how to react to it, except to leave.
But what comes out of that is her deciding that she can break rules too. She can consider the African-American gardener. Instead of completely retreating, she begins to venture out.
Raymond, what a tremendous surprise finding you here.
Mrs. Whitaker, hello.
Julianne Moore's character's in the art gallery, and Raymond, the gardener, and his daughter are there. And then it turns out that everyone is watching her talk to the black gardener.
For the first time, she's having a conversation with someone who's listening to her.
So what's your opinion on modern art?
It's hard to put into words, really. I just know what I care for. And
She begins to explore the idea to kind of leap racial boundaries and be with someone who is that different.
Todd likes these time periods because it's easier to go into the past and take controversial aspects of ourselves, and you can teach people through the past about themselves in the present.
Haynes exposes Frank's torment as his heterosexual facade finally dissolves.
Something's happened.
It's the slow realization of the Quaid character realizing that he's got to come clean with himself.
I've fallen in love with someone.
There's something so blatantly honest to the viewer that you can't escape it.
The 50s were so awful for people of color, for people who were queer, for women who were trapped in meaningless lives. But for us looking back at them, there's something fascinating.
Like the outwardly perfect women in Superstar and Safe, Far From Heaven's Kathy Whitaker sees her life unravel.
For all of the boundaries that are up, the one that remains the most entrenched at the end of the film is the gender barrier. The men leave, and she can't.
Frank goes to live with another man, and Raymond moves to Baltimore, while Kathy is left alone with the kids.
When Kathy goes to the train station, she has resigned herself to the life she will have to lead. She was not allowed the choice.
Far From Heaven gets rave reviews and Oscar nominations. But Haynes is pulled back to his old obsession with pop music icons.
I was starting to listen to Bob Dylan again. And what I found was this subject who was defined by radical change and upheaval, somebody who would enter into a certain phase of music and then reject it and move on to something else.
He called me up and said, I want to do a movie about Bob Dylan, but I have to know I have the rights. Like, I can't go into this like with Velvet Goldmine or like with Karen Carpenter. I need to know.
The most foreboding and formidable of all these subjects, Bob Dylan, was the one who said, sure.
There he lies. God rest his soul and his rudeness.
In the opening autopsy scene, Haynes starts to dissect the idea of Bob Dylan, casting 6 different actors as 6 different Dylans in 6 entwined stories about his life.
Male and female, different races, portraying Bob Dylan. It's ridiculous. But in another sense, it's the only way you can ever make a film that was honest or compelling about someone who's so mythic and yet so little known.
I'm Not There may be Todd Haynes' most audacious film since his debut feature, Poison.
To take this iconic musical figure and dissect the various musical periods so completely that he's made them into different people, which in fact, musically, I mean, you could say that they are.
He could do a funny thing. He could do a pathos thing. He was sensational.
Like the singer himself, Haynes loves to challenge notions of authenticity, making a fake documentary about Christian Bale's acoustic Dylan, and fictionalizing a real documentary to capture Cate Blanchett's electric Dylan.
Not some shepherd.
I'm Not There emphasizes the singer's slippery take on truth, like when he's asked if he still cares about people.
You know, we all have our own definitions of all those words.
We all have our own definitions of all those words.
Care and
people.
People.
Haynes' collage approach receives critical accolades, despite disappointing some Dylan fans.
The idea of this fracturing with this outrageous directorial nerve, I don't know that the audience deserved it. But I love that Todd thought so.
In 2015, Haynes reunites with Cate Blanchett and introduces her to his 1950s universe of highly stylized melodrama.
It's essentially a love story between 2 women. One is a woman who's a little older. She has a small child. She's married. And the other is a shop girl.
What do you do on Sundays?
Nothing in particular. What do you do?
Oh. Nothing lately.
In a restaurant scene, Haynes exploits subtle gestures and nuanced looks to show the forbidden mutual attraction between 2 women who exist in a repressed world.
Would you like to come visit me this Sunday?
Yes.
Like in Patricia Highsmith's legendary novel on which it's based, Haynes' film ends with Carol staying with her lover, and leaving her husband.
The role is tricky. It's a man whose wife is having an affair with another woman whose heart is somewhere else. At the end, my character ends up having learned, but at the same time, he'll always be lonely. And I don't see anything good happening. His psyche's
You know, it's the stuff of all great art, isn't it? It's human tragedy. It's the looming fate of mere mortals. There's a beautiful scene when Cate Blanchett has invited Rooney Mara's character to come out to her suburban home. And on the way, they stop for her to shop for a Christmas tree. Rooney Mara, with her little camera, begins to shoot photographs of this glamorous woman trapped in that frame, viewed with love, but viewed in this world where she's also penned in. And this becomes the start of her life as a photographer. And I love the idea of the young woman coming to being a lesbian through coming to be a photographer, and can't help but see that also as some kind of parallel for Todd, who came of age as a filmmaker, came of age as a gay man, and was able to see the two as absolutely connected.
Carol receives a standing ovation at its Cannes premiere and is nominated for 5 Academy Awards.
When you look at his work and you see how varied the films have been, and they are beautiful. They are so incredibly cinematic and kind of pulsing with emotion. You always come away with who we are as human beings and what we can mean for each other.
No, I wasn't at Cannes. I can tell you that I saw them there, and it looked like they were having a fine time. Never been there. Well, I've never been invited, that's the thing, you know. You can't really go if you're not invited, but yeah, nonetheless, it's a great opportunity to work on a project like that. And I couldn't thank him enough, other than the fact that I wasn't invited to Cannes. But